Now let's talk about if statements in C++. So far we've seen sequential executions where we have had one statement after another and they are executed one after another. In programs, sometimes we need to make a decision to follow one path where we execute a set of statements or follow a different path. So visually, it might look like this. We make a decision. If some condition is true, we follow the path on the left, execute a bunch of statements. If it's not true, we execute a different set of statements, and then the execution continues after that construct. So which path we follow is controlled by a condition, which is a Boolean expression, something that we just learned about. This conditional execution is supported by a new construct that we'll learn about, which is the if statements. So let's take a look at the if statement and its format. So it looks like the following. So right off the bat, we have a couple of new keywords, if and else. So we can add that to our repertoire of keywords that we know about. And we know since these are reserved words, we can't use them as variable names. After the if, within parentheses is a Boolean expression. After that is a section of statements within curly braces. Now, a set of statements within curly braces is called a block, right? So this would be referred to as an if block. And similarly, there is an else block with statements in there. Now, the else part of this if construct is optional. You can skip that if you want to. Now, execution proceeds as follows. The Boolean expression is evaluated. If it is true, then the if block is executed. If it is false, then the else block is executed. Again, you don't have to have an else block. Also, I should mention is that if within a block you only have a single statement, then you can skip the curly braces. So let's take a look at an actual example. Here you have a simple example. If age, let's assume there's a variable called age that holds someone's age. If age is greater than or equal to 21, you print you can drink. Otherwise, you print sorry but. Right? So since there are two paths we can follow, this is referred to as binary selection. Now, if you skip the else, then it'll be called a unary selection because there's only one path that you have a condition on. So that would look like the following. If age is less than 21, you print you can't drink, and then you print thanks. Compare this with the following code, where we only have a single statement within the if body. So we have skipped the curly braces, and then the thanks appears afterwards. So if someone's age is under 21, it's going to print uh, you can't drink, and then it'll print thanks. But if it's over 21, it'll still print the thanks because this is not part of the if body. Okay, now let's talk about a pitfall. We have to be careful when using floating point numbers in the condition. So what do I mean by that? Let's explore that with an example. Here I have a piece of code. I'm going to actually copy this into the IDE and then we'll talk about it there. So I'll make a copy of it. We'll go to the IDE and we will replace the previous code we had with this. Now let's take a look at what this does. Now here I have a couple of doubles. I have A, which I have set to 0.1, B, which I've set to 0.2. And then I add them up and I put it in another double called sum. Then I compare sum to 0.3, which is what I would expect because we're adding 0.1 and 0.2. And they'll say, yeah, this is 0.3. If not, we will say, no, it's not 0.3. Now we perfectly expect this to be 0.3, so let's execute and see what happens. Now we run it, and strangely enough, we find that it says the sum is not 0.3. So that's very, very strange. And what is happening here? And the reason is, since these are floating point numbers, there's there's a limited amount of memory to represent them, they will be inherently imprecise. They'll be very close to point 0.3 or point 0.1 or point 0.2, but they're not quite. To illustrate that, let me instrument this code a bit to show you what exactly is happening. So I'm going to go back to the assignment, and I have another piece of code that adds this section at the bottom. So I'm going to copy this and then into the IDE first, and then we can talk about it there. So I pasted that. Let's see what is happening here. I pulled in another library to help me set precision, but I've added this section at the bottom. The top part is the same. And in the bottom part, I've set the precision so it will so it'll print a lot more numbers after the decimal. Then I print A, I print B, and I print sum. And then I print the literal point 0.3, and you'll notice that none of these are what we expect. So let's run this. So you'll notice that, A, which is expected to be zero point 0.1, is, very close to zero point 0.1, but not quite. B is not, quite zero point 0.2, but very close to it. And sum is also, again, not quite zero point 0.3. Even the literal zero point 0.3 is not exactly zero point 0.3, right? So, but they're very, very close. These are approximations. And that's why you can't use them in conditions in this way, because you'll get unexpected results. So going back, Um, let's talk about nested and chained conditional. So the if block and the else block can themselves contain other if statements in a nested fashion. So, for example, let's write some code to compare two numbers. Here you have a number x and you have a number y. These are integers, right? And we want to print like which is smaller or whether they're equal. So one way we could write it is as following. We could say if x is less than y, then we can certainly say, okay, x is smaller. Uh, Otherwise, there could be two possible conditions. Y could be smaller, or x and y could be equal. So we have a nested conditional here that prints that out. If y is less than x and prints y is smaller. Otherwise, the only option left is they must be exactly the same, right? So this is right, but it is cumbersome and hard to read. So there's another format for representing if statements like this, which is a chained representation. And the way you write it is you have an if statement and then multiple else if blocks. And then you finally have an else block, right? So this is a lot easier to read. You say if x is less than y, then say x is smaller. So y is less than x, then y is smaller. Else the only condition must be that they are equal, right? So chained if statement execution proceeds in order. The first Boolean expression that is matched, um, it executes the resulting body, and it stops. All right.